Hello, this is going to be a YouTube video about analyzing political cartoons. Full disclosure though, it is also going to be a homework assignment that I myself have to complete for a training that I'm currently attending. So I might make another YouTube video, I might make edits to this YouTube video down the line as well. So let's go ahead and look into this. Okay, so analyzing political cartoons is going to be the subject of this YouTube video. I've been told that you guys know what SOAP analysis is, that you guys have used SOAP analysis before in Miss. Hold on, let me just make sure that things okay. Okay. That you've used SOAP analysis before in Miss Ferran's AP English language class. So if you talk to my former 10th graders and now currently 11th graders, super proud of all of them. And maybe I will see them 12th grade year again. But we did a lot of SOAP analysis in our class. I think they really were tired of it towards the end there. We're not going to be doing as much SOAP analysis in this class. Except within the context of like political cartoons. We're going to do a lot of close reading of documents and primary sources like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, etc. We may use SOAP to kind of like broadly frame our discussions of those documents, but we really have to know, specific provisions in those documents. So it's not going to be the only thing that we'll do with those primary documents. But yeah, so SOAP analysis is really going to help us kind of analyze political cartoons. I would say too that it is going to help us in the sense that of becoming better consumers of media, better consumers of even memes. Memes are kind of like, I guess, the political cartoon of the everyman and woman nowadays. But SOAP, you should think of it as a tool. I don't necessarily expect you, or actually don't want you to be writing down the letters of SOAP and then filling out, as I'm going to do here, letter by letter, elements of a political cartoon. No, I think it's just something good to have in the back of your head to kind of help and aid you in analysis of political cartoons. So keep that in mind. Also, I will say you guys use SOAP within the context of, I believe, nonfiction documents in AP language. We're going to use SOAP analysis to analyze political cartoons. Drawings, essentially. And I would just say that the way that they're referred to in AP government are visual texts. Visual text, because much texts that you find, nonfiction texts that you've seen, they carry unique messages as well, and we'll be able to dissect them in a bit. But the letters of SOAP are speaker, occasion, audience, and purpose. Okay, so here's the game plan for what we're going to do today. I'm going to take this away. A second here. We're going to be analyzing political cartoons on two subjects: gun violence, which is one of the major social problems that we identified and are going to be talking about for Unit 4, I think, and also President Trump's zero tolerance policy, which broadly falls under, or not broadly, but falls under the category of mistreatment of immigrants, which is another social problem that we identified that we are going to be tackling actually in Unit 4 or Unit 3, both in Unit 3. So both those social problems will be tackled in Unit 3. Unit 4, I believe, is mass incarceration. Unit 1 was police violence, and then Unit 2 was authoritarianism. And then Unit 5 we're going to use all those kinds of social problems to kind of grapple with the concepts that we'll learn about in Unit 5. Sorry, I forgot about that for a minute. So actually, this is a very appropriately made PowerPoint. But we're going to go in there and we're going to fill out SOAP. Remember, I'm going to be writing it down, but you don't necessarily have to be writing it down physically on when you take the multiple choice or when you take the test, AP Government test in May. I don't necessarily want you physically writing it down, but we may be doing activities in the future where you physically have to write down SOAP, so I can kind of see that you're analyzing the document correctly. The first element of this, though, is that you kind of want to have a summary of the document, maybe kind of a throwaway line about what the document is all about before you actually get into the SOAP analysis. So I often like looking at the political cartoon first, and then kind of have kind of try to distill my thoughts as I'm trying to position the political cartoon within a specific historical context, kind of decipher the purpose of the political cartoon, etc. I try to summarize, so to speak, an image. Summarize an image, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But first, we got to look at what this image has. This image says U.S. citizen mass shooting report form. It gives a date with a blank. A mass shooting at a blank school, shopping center, other public space occurred at AM/PM. Right, so it gives you like fill in the blanks for like a mass shooting. The suspect or suspects, blank, was/were using a blank brand semi-automatic blank model. Americans offered blank thoughts, blank prayers, blank both. So you kind of check off one. The NRA blamed blank. The president called for significant blank. Congress offered the usual blank. Consensus reached yes, no, yeah, right. So this is a very, interesting political cartoon, and in a moment I'll talk about what political cartoons mean to me in my life as both a avid reader of news media when we get into President Trump's zero tolerance policy. But this is a very powerful political cartoon, right? And so we obviously know that it's about mass shootings, right? We have the mass shooting report form, right? SOAP analysis SOAP is going to help us kind of uncover, this deeper analysis, right? To kind of get at the deeper meaning, two things: get at the deeper meaning of the text, and also to kind of also get at like what is this image, or what is this political cartoon trying to do? What's its goals? Where is it coming from? So the first thing I think I like to do a lot of the times, you don't necessarily have to do this, is I kind of try to summarize what I think the main message is, right? And I think the main message of this political cartoon is pretty simple. I'm not going to summarize. By summary, I don't mean like don't describe what's in there, but try to summarize the main message. That's a distinction, right? So a summary of describing what's in the political cartoon would say there's a lot of blanks in the political cartoon. There's some notion about the NRA, the president. No. So this would be a summary of the main message. And the main message would be something like this. The message of the cartoon that mass shootings have become normalized. And I'll talk about what I mean by that shortly. So that's the summary I came up with. What do I mean by this? Mass shootings have become normalized. And how do I get this, right? Because just like the nonfiction text that you read in AP English Language, just like what you had to do in AP World History, I didn't have you as the AP World History teacher, Ms. Jones did, and I can assure you she did it. You have to have specific supports for this, right? You don't necessarily have to list them, but I was able to come to the conclusion that this is the summary of the main message of this political cartoon by evidence. And so I saw U.S. citizen mass shooting report form. You know, I saw a lot of blanks. I saw a lot of areas where it seemed like it was suggesting like, okay, the date of this mass shooting report form can happen anywhere. It's a school, shopping center. It gives you a lot of options to tick off. Americans offer thoughts and prayers, or both. And thoughts and prayers are supposed to be very, you know, given in times of great tragedy, and you're supposed to offer them, you know, with a sense of, you know, deep despair and regret about the events that took place. But it's kind of like offhanded. There's in this mass shooting that we don't know about, did Americans offer thoughts? They offer prayers? Offer both? Check it off. Check off the box. The NRA blamed who? The president called for significant blank, and Congress offered the usual blank. So it uses words like usual. It suggests that these different actors in, you know, politics are going to have different are going to have, like, you know, different responses, it seems, or have specific responses. Consensus reached at the very bottom tells me that it's suggesting that mass shootings are becoming normalized. Yes, no, and then yeah, right. And so that yeah, right says, like, of course there's not going to be a consensus reached, because there's never been a consensus reached. So this is just the new normal. Right? There's almost kind of like a despair in this political cartoon. And this gets at, like, personally, I think this cartoon is very powerful, but the next political cartoons, when we get into zero tolerance policy, are much, much more powerful to me. And I'll explain why. Political cartoons have the ability to, like all good forms of art, you know, tear at your heartstrings, you know, tear at your heartstrings, and also, you know, have an ability to tell you, yeah, you're sane. Like, if you are a person, an American citizen, that actually thinks that mass shootings are a very big problem in our society, gun violence is a big problem in our society, and you're frustrated with this stasis that we seem to be in, where there hasn't been anything really done to address this, and there's probably going to be another mass shooting later down the line. This cartoon speaks to you. It speaks to your anger. It tells you, like, yeah, your anger is valid. And it also takes issues that are supposedly very complicated and complex and distills them down into something that's easy to look at. So it's powerful. Political cartoons can be powerful. I love looking at political cartoons. Yeah, so that's the main summary that I came up with. The other part two, let's go ahead and go into the SOAP analysis first. So for speaker, I intentionally left the speaker out here. I think they signed it here. Oh, just one more thing that I forgot to mention about this, like, political cartoon. It has, like, a seal of, like, you know, the president, or not the president, but of like the country of the United States here. It says U.S. citizen mass shooting report form, but it has this kind of feel towards it, like it's kind of like a DMV application, where it's like handed out to, like, a lot of people, and everyone fills it out, and you submit it, and that's it. And so that contributes to, you know, how I came to that conclusion about what I think the summary of the main message of the political cartoon is. The speaker I didn't include. For non-visual text like for visual text like political cartoons, speaker usually is less relevant unless the speaker is someone famous. Yeah, and what I mean by this is, like, if the speaker, for instance, like that drew this was Barack Obama. I don't know. We know Barack Obama can't draw, or I don't think he can draw. Then talking about him as a speaker would be important, and we would say something along the lines of Barack Obama And this, remember, is going in your head, right? This is helping you analyze the political cartoon. This isn't necessarily going on the paper on your AP exam. Barack Obama, but not just listing him, right? Because that would be featured at the bottom of the credit. Barack Obama, you know, he's a president that, you know, advocated for gun control legislation that was blocked by House Republicans and Senate Republicans, or Senate Republicans. But that's not as relevant because obviously that didn't happen. But in other texts, like maybe a speech, right? If you were given a speech by like Emma Gonzalez or David Hogg, so those are survivors of the Parkland shooting that later became activists advocating for greater gun control. Like if you had a speech about, if you were given their speech from the March for Our Lives rally in Washington, D.C., then talking about David Hogg and then Emma Gonzalez, and then you would also have to include something more, right? It's not just about naming, right? SOAP is not just about like, you know, pulling stuff from the text and dropping it there. No, it's trying to activate your thinking behind it, right? Emma Gonzalez, but who is she, right? And we know that she's a Parkland survivor, and she was one of the leading activists out of Parkland. The occasion can be very specific and it can be more general. So if you have a specific date attached to this political cartoon, that's important. You can imagine this political cartoon coming after a horrific mass shooting, like Parkland or Aurora or the Las Vegas shooting or Sandy Hook. You can imagine then listing, you know, that specific context. If they give you a date for the political cartoon, I mean, that's, the date is relevant, but what happened around that time period? For now, because there is no specific date, you know, speaking about the general occasion, speaking about the general context in which it happens, you can just talk about U.S. as many mass shootings in schools and public spaces hasn't dealt with in 21st century. You can also talk about, you know, the fact that school shootings really didn't become a thing until after the Columbine shooting in the 1990s. You can also talk about that time frame, right, if it's like related to a school shooting. So there's a lot of stuff that you can talk about in terms of occasion. Again, I'm saying talk about, but you know, this is really just to, you know, going on in the back of your head at like a really fast speed, ideally, right? As you're trying to analyze the political cartoon for, you know, its message, its you know, power, maybe its biases, what's it trying to get across, etc. So who is the audience to this? And I think this gets at, you know, that can be very general too, right, for something like this. It seems like the American public in general, right? American public and maybe even elected officials, maybe even the NRA. They mentioned the NRA by name, but it seems like it's more like it has a tone that it's more resigned. It doesn't sound like it's as directed at like elected officials. I think if it were more directed at elected officials, it would have been even more like biting and mean, because we as Americans tend to want to consume stuff when, especially in the 21st century, that is biting, and that if it's directed at elected officials, that is biting and mean. Or if it's directed at the NRA. And it could be directed at all of those kinds of different political groups. But I think it's principally directed at the American public, an American public that is kind of resigned to mass shootings, that has basically kind of given up. And then I think the purpose could be criticize American society, right? I think that's the big point, right? It doesn't seem like it just wants to criticize Congress or the president or just the NRA, although, having the NRA feature in this, suggests that the political cartoonist probably thinks the NRA has a lot of influence on gun control legislation, which it does, and is partially responsible blame for mass shootings, but it seems to want to criticize American society, right? The public, that seems apathetic, that seems like, whatever, give it up, it's a part of life. Maybe even to criticize, different aspects of our government and interest groups, aspects of our government being Congress and the president, and interest groups being the NRA. So it seems like it's a general criticism of American society. How can you let this happen? So all of that is going in the back of your head as you're analyzing this political cartoon. This would be going on super, super fast. You can imagine occasions where I might actually want you to write them out just so I can, look at your thinking, right? And this is just my thinking on a page right now. But I don't anticipate you needing to do this on the AP exam because the multiple choice question is going to be really fast. Okay. So this is another political cartoon. About gun violence. It seems it takes a different approach. You can see the founders on kind of like a time machine, and he's saying, I'm just saying a few more adjectives in the Second Amendment couldn't hurt, right? So it gets at this idea that, people kind of have this Second Amendment, or people often cite their Second Amendment rights or the Second Amendment has become very politicized in the gun control debate. Some people argue that it says something or says one thing, and the other people argue it says another thing. So I don't want to do this political cartoon for you because I don't want to be doing all the political cartoons. So I'm just I want you to go ahead and take out a sheet of paper or type it out, do the SOAP analysis and the summary for this political cartoon. And go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so now we're going to continue with President Trump's zero tolerance policy. So this fits within the mistreatment of immigrants social problem that we are going to focus a lot about in our class. Obviously we all live in the Valley. We are, very, I think this social problem, touches, is very dear to a lot of us, right? And I think a lot of us remember that in 2018. If you don't, then there will be links in the description to ProPublica pieces that did really good about chronicling the Trump administration's hard zero tolerance policy on immigrants. And there will be a link to, I think, a Time magazine video that can help recap you. And I'll go ahead and try to give a brief recap as well. But I think we all kind of remember that in 2018, we were the site of a lot of media focus and scrutiny related to President Trump's zero tolerance policy. So in particular, just to kind of give you the broad idea behind President Trump's zero tolerance policy, and then to get at why this political cartoon is very powerful, and the one that succeeds is very powerful. Immigrants that come to the United States can come through many different ways. Sorry, but immigrants that come to the United States from Central America, more specifically in recent years, President Trump warned about an influx of Mexican immigrants to launch his 2016 presidential campaign, but the reality is a good portion of them come from Central America, not from Mexico anymore. But those immigrants, absent, the long legal process that awaits them if they want to become a citizen in the United States, they can come to the United States in search of political asylum. They can come and present themselves at ports of entry, for instance. Migrants can come present themselves at ports of entry, which are like bridges that link the United States with Mexico after traveling long, often dangerous journeys, and they can say that they request political asylum. They can do this. This is a right that they have under international law and domestic law in the United States, and claim that they fear going back to their home country because they fear maybe death or persecution. And there's a lot of merit to that because a lot of immigrants are coming from very violent societies or societies plagued by gang violence. We can talk later about what actually will grant someone asylum and like how it's kind of inadequate. But people do flee for a variety of different reasons and are looking to come to the United States. The people that come to the United States can claim political asylum. If they claim political asylum at a port of entry, so at a bridge, they can then be processed, or they can be released into the country. They are expected to come and appear at a court date at a later date. They're expected to prove that their asylum application is legitimate, that they actually will qualify under political or qualify under asylum, and they have the burden of proof is on the immigrant. That's been longstanding. Oftentimes what people do too is that they'll try to not cross at a port of entry. They'll cross, like for us, it would be the Rio Grande River, and they'll maybe present themselves to a Border Patrol agent, and they'll say, I'm looking for political asylum. And so have you. Some people will cross and are not necessarily looking for asylum, but they're looking for economic opportunity. So they're crossing with the mindset that they don't want to get caught, and they potentially do. So oftentimes what happens a lot of like the asylum application cases, you're supposed to, legally, you're supposed to present your political asylum at ports of entry, I believe. I could be wrong about that. And technically, it is unlawful to cross the United States absent a port of entry, like to not cross the United States, to cross into the United States if you're not entering at a port of entry. So in theory, if you wanted to look for asylum, you would need to go through a port of entry lawfully, right? So what happens in practice, though, is that laws aren't, administrations, the executive branch executes policies in very different and distinct ways. What happens, historically, at least as I can think of in the Bush and Obama administration, is that if you were claiming asylum, if you crossed into the United States unlawfully and you got caught for crossing the United States unlawfully, what would happen to you is that you would be processed and eventually deported. What President Trump did in 2018 is he created this zero tolerance policy. And so the zero tolerance policy was essentially this, the idea behind the zero tolerance policy was that the people that crossed unlawfully, even if they were seeking political asylum, even if they were trying to get caught by Border Patrol, and then especially those people that crossed unlawfully that were not trying to get caught by Border Patrol, but ended up getting caught by Border Patrol, they would be charged with a crime. And so what that did is, if those people were, with children, a lot of cases, their own children, or, relatives of them, if you're charged with a crime, you're separated from your child. And so under the zero tolerance policy, all of them would be tried with a crime that crossed unlawfully, unless you presented yourself at a port of entry. And then there was some reporting that said that even CBP officials at port of entries were turning back people that were trying to seek asylum at ports of entry. So I'll include the link of the description there. But in theory, that's not supposed to happen, but it did, or the reporting indicates that it did. So, yeah, effectively, it's a policy of child separation. So if you're prosecuted with a crime, you could, if you're charged with a crime, you could be several months without your kid. You can imagine if you came with your kid. Because when it was previous administration's policies to just like process and then deport. And the Trump administration was to zero tolerance, to charge. That charging decision itself is obviously, has been the focus of a lot of scrutiny and criticism itself. It's been called effectively Trump, separating families. And so that's the context in which this, so I guess that's the occasion, right? The long occasion in which this political cartoon appears, right? And so what I think is so powerful about this political cartoon is that you can see that there's a lot of almost religious imagery in this political cartoon by this cartoonist, and then in the next cartoon that I'll show you that I expect you to do by yourself, there is a lot of religious imagery as well. And I think that serves a really distinct purpose. But the imagery that you see in this political cartoon is super, powerful. You can see that you have this mom with her child that are kind of, deliberately designed to kind of mirror Mary and Jesus, right? To kind of parallel them and you can see that they're people of color. And then you can see these hands, these kind of gross looking hands, evil looking hands coming to take the child away. And then you can even see like this is a beautiful stained glass window that you'd see in a church, and then over here you can see like flames, right? And then you can see a little T right here, and that T, I think it's pretty obvious stands for Trump, right? And so it's a super powerful political cartoon, right? And so I think the summary of the main message of this political cartoon is pretty obvious, right? Given the information I gave you. And the summary would be Trump's zero, I'll move it in a second, tolerance policy was inhumane. Right? And then if we go into SOA, the speaker doesn't matter as much as we discussed. The occasion would be all that stuff that I just described, zero tolerance policy by Trump. Audience is the interesting part, though, I would say. And I think it's, if you don't know a lot about like the electorate, a good Trump, for a variety of reasons, or actually for reasons that sometimes confuse me, but he is often supported a lot by evangelical voters, very religious voters. He's also supported by the majority. In 2016, he was, at least. He won the majority of white Catholics in the United States. So I think the audience, in addition to being the American public again, and maybe not so much Trump himself, because I don't think whoever drew this cartoon thought that he would view this, but also I think the audience was like religious voters who support Trump. This is a very powerful political cartoon, but I think that's who the audience was, right? And you can see, using that religious imagery and how effective that is, right? And also how deliberate it is too, because it also gets at this idea too that we've often, that's been joked about too, is that it seems that in the America that we live in today, there's a lot of hatred that goes on towards immigrants, particularly a specific group of immigrants, which are immigrants of color that speak Spanish, that are from south of the border, but white immigration, not so much. But I think that speaks to this idea too, that this that often gets thrown around circles, is that Jesus was born in it was a kind of a refugee of sorts, born in Palestine, would have likely have been not, or would have been a person of color as well. So I think it's a very powerful critique. So I think the purpose of this is to critique religious who support Trump, more broadly the Trump administration. And so that's how you would do SOAP analysis with this. Very, very, very powerful political cartoon. Obviously, gun violence is a huge problem in our society as well, that we've talked about in our society. Mistreatment of immigration, of immigrants hits close to home for a lot of us, and a lot of our families too. But I think these political cartoons are very effective. Very effective. And this political cartoon is another one from the same artist. I think this political cartoon won a Pulitzer Prize as well, because you can win Pulitzer Prizes for cartooning. And this one won the Pulitzer Prize as well, this cartoonist. And you can see the religious imagery again, zero tolerance policy. I will say too that the reason why I wanted to do this lesson is because obviously you're going to have political cartoons on the AP government test, and I want you to think, critically and be able to interrogate like the meaning of the text and in many different ways. But I also want you to get excited when you see a political cartoon, or to realize that political cartoons can be like some of the best stuff that you read in your English literature class. They can pull at your heartstrings, and they certainly are something that I love to see. Actually, I don't think I have any magazines with me now, but certainly, I am a subscriber to the New Yorker, a variety of different newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, and I have one more subscription, The Atlantic. And sometimes there's political cartoons in there that help set the stage for what I'm about to read, and that makes them powerful. There are images that are drawn in there that makes the story powerful and meaningful. And we're going to read some pieces in the New Yorker and ProPublica that have political cartoons embedded in them. And I want you to allow those political cartoons to be able to, think critically of them, right? Like anything that you read and analyze, don't just accept the message blindly, but allow those political cartoons to help set the stage for what you're reading, to help, in the cases where it does pull at your heartstrings, let it pull at your heartstrings, but also think critically of these cartoons in the same sense too, and think about what are the messages of these political cartoons as well, and how effective do they portray them, and how effective are they? Do they comport well with the facts too? Because that's important too, because political cartoons don't necessarily comport well with the facts as well. They don't necessarily have to. All right, that's it for today.